Have you ever been absolutely certain about something you remembered, only to find out later that your memory played a trick on you? Perhaps you were convinced you saw a familiar face in a crowd, only to realize it was a complete stranger. Our memories, while incredibly powerful, are also fascinatingly complex and, at times, surprisingly fallible. Today, we're going to explore one such intriguing aspect of human memory, particularly how it interacts with our perception of others. It's a cognitive phenomenon that has significant real-world implications, especially in critical areas like the justice system. We're going to unravel what's known as the cross-race effect, sometimes called the other race effect or own race bias. It might sound like a mouthful, but I promise, we'll break it down into simple, understandable pieces, exploring not just what it is, but why it happens and what we can do about it. At its heart, the cross-race effect is a well-documented tendency for people to more accurately recognize and remember faces from their own racial or ethnic group compared to faces from other groups. Think of it this way. You're generally better at telling apart individuals who share your racial background than those who don't. This isn't a judgment or a reflection of anyone's character. It's a deeply ingrained pattern in how our brains process facial information. While the scientific community has been studying this for decades, with early mentions going back to 1914, the core finding remains consistent. We have a superior ability to distinguish among faces we see more often. Imagine trying to differentiate between various breeds of a dog you rarely encounter versus those you see every day. You'd likely be much better at picking out subtle differences in the familiar breeds. Our brains, in a way, become expert at processing the nuances of faces we're frequently exposed to. So, why does this happen? Scientists have proposed several theories, and they often work together to paint a fuller picture. One leading idea is the Perceptual Expertise Hypothesis. This suggests that because we have more frequent exposure to faces from our own racial group throughout our lives, we develop a specialized expertise in processing them. We learn to see faces from our own group in a more holistic or configural way, meaning we take in the entire face, the relationship between features, the overall shape. For faces from other racial groups, however, we might process them more featurally, focusing on individual components like the nose, eyes, or mouth, but not necessarily seeing the whole picture as readily. It's like being able to recognize your best friend just by their silhouette, but needing to focus on specific details to identify someone you've only met once or twice. Then there's the social cognition or categorization hypothesis. This theory posits that when we encounter someone from a different racial group, our brains might initially categorize them as belonging to an outgroup. This categorization can sometimes lead to a more superficial way of processing their face, focusing more on what makes them part of that general category rather than on the unique features that make them an individual. Our brains, perhaps unconsciously, are less motivated to individuate them. Interestingly, the contact hypothesis offers a counterpoint and a glimmer of hope. It suggests that increased exposure and familiarity with individuals from diverse racial groups can actually reduce the magnitude of the cross-race effect. The more you interact with people from different backgrounds, the more expertise your brain can develop in processing those faces, potentially lessening the bias over time.
Now, why is understanding the cross-race effect so important? Its profound impact on memory and eyewitness identification is where its real-world significance shines through. It contributes to a higher rate of misidentification of individuals from racial backgrounds different from the eyewitness. This difficulty affects both our initial memory formation, how we encode or take in information, and our later ability to retrieve or recall it. Crucially, the cross-race effect also impairs what scientists call metacognitive judgments, meaning people are often less accurate in predicting their own ability to recognize faces from other racial groups. They might think they'd be good at it, but the science says otherwise. The consequences of this cognitive bias are starkly illustrated in the criminal justice system. We see it in cases like Ronald Cotton's, where a cross-racial misidentification by an eyewitness, Jennifer Thompson, led to Cotton's wrongful conviction. It was only years later through DNA evidence that he was exonerated. Otis Boone's case is another powerful example, where a cross-racial identification was a significant factor. While his conviction was eventually overturned on other grounds, the New York Court of Appeals' subsequent ruling in his case made history, mandating that trial courts must provide jury instructions on the cross-race effect when cross-racial identification is at issue. Organizations like the Innocence Project consistently highlight cross-racial misidentification as a leading cause of wrongful convictions, contributing to a substantial percentage of DNA exonerations. This isn't just theory, it's about real lives, real freedom, and real justice. In response, legal systems like the New York State Court of Appeals have begun adapting. Law enforcement agencies are also stepping up, implementing revised eyewitness identification procedures, such as improved lineup construction, to mitigate the effect's impact. Despite the robust evidence for the cross-race effect, there are still ongoing discussions and debates. The precise interplay of the various mechanisms, perceptual expertise, social categorization, cognitive load, is still being researched. There isn't one single model that fully explains every aspect of this phenomenon. A major point of contention remains the reliance on eyewitness testimony in criminal trials, given the proven impact of the cross-race effect. How do we balance an eyewitness's sincere belief with the scientific evidence of memory's limitations? This leads to debates about legal safeguards. Should jury instructions about the cross-race effect be mandatory? Advocates argue yes to ensure fair trials, while some express concerns they might unfairly imply racial bias. Yet, as we've seen, some courts are indeed mandating them. And the long-term effectiveness of mitigation strategies like increased exposure or specialized training is still a topic of active research. Crucially, it's vital to understand that the cross-race effect is a cognitive limitation in face processing. It's not an indication of malicious racial prejudice or intentional bias by an eyewitness. It's an unconscious mental shortcut, a wiring in our brains based on experience. While it can inadvertently reinforce stereotypes, it's not about someone choosing to be biased. This distinction is often blurred in public discourse, and clarifying it is essential.
So, what does the future hold? The cross-race effect will continue to be a critical area of focus. Ongoing research aims to better understand its underlying causes and to develop even more effective mitigation strategies. The legal system will likely continue its evolution, incorporating scientific understanding into judicial processes, refining jury instructions, and improving police procedures. Ultimately, the goal is to enhance public awareness, refine legal safeguards, and develop more effective strategies to counteract this pervasive cognitive bias. By doing so, we move closer to preventing wrongful convictions and ensuring fairer, more just outcomes for everyone. Understanding the cross-race effect isn't about blaming anyone. It's about understanding the fascinating, sometimes humbling, ways our memories work. It's about using scientific knowledge to build a more just and equitable society, where the truth can be discerned with the greatest possible accuracy. Thank you for joining me on this exploration of memory and evidence.